Hello and welcome to Investing for Physicians. In this episode, we are going to be talking about what life is going to be like after graduating from medical school, and specifically what you can be doing with your financial life to make sure that everything is going to work out. Whether you are just graduating from medical school and starting residency, or finishing residency and getting your first job post that, this is going to be the video for you to figure out how you should budget, how you should look at your investments, how you should look at life insurance, all of these different questions to make sure that your financial life is in order. The first thing that we need to talk about is making a budget. Now, this gets a bad connotation, but let me explain to you what I mean. For a physician just graduating from medical school, you should be putting away 25% or so of your gross income, which means you take your entire income and you just split off that 25% and you say that is going into savings. Now, what do I mean by savings? Savings encompasses two things, which is investment for retirement and repayment of your debt. Depending on your situation, that 25% could lean more towards the one than towards the other. For example, if you have a very high interest rate loan, you might want to put 20% into repaying your debt and only 5% of your income into investment for retirement. If you have a pretty low interest rate loan, or if it's a loan from a family member, maybe you can afford to put a little bit more into retirement, maybe 20% into retirement, 5% into repaying your loan. One way or the other, 25% of your gross income never hits your pockets, never is available to spend. It goes immediately into your investment for the future. Now, I know this seems like a big hit, and it is. But the truth is, you are not wealthy yet. You do not have the right to go and buy all these fancy cars and finance a giant house just because you went through all the hard work of medical school. I know, it was tough, and you deserve to treat yourself, but do it within the proper bounds and still be rigorous about putting away that money so that you can be paying yourself first and that you can be putting money towards the future and be able to have that financial security. At the end of the day, wealth is not a measure of how much you make. Wealth is a measure of how much you keep. So, as of now, you're not that wealthy. In fact, you're probably among the poorest because of all this debt that you've accrued over medical school. But if you're diligent and you practice this delayed gratification, you will eventually be able to work up to a spot where you can feel wealthy. Now, speaking of budgeting, there are many programs that can be used to give debt forgiveness. Specifically, the ones that I've heard of will be working in the public sector for a certain number of years, after which your debt will be forgiven. You'll have to make the minimum payments along the way, but if you just do the minimum payments and then fulfill whatever requirement this ends up being, that can be a good option to get out from under your debt. But be sure you look into it and see if it's a good option for you. See if you can find a public hospital to work at or some community center, something like that, that could just be for the first little bit of your career, if that's what you want, to get that debt forgiveness. As part of your budgeting, we have that 25% that is just being sliced off to go into investing, and I'll get a little bit more into the details of that later. But within the rest that is set aside for your consumption, you also need to start building up an emergency fund. An emergency fund is normally between 3 to 6 months of living expenses. So, depending on your situation, you're going to have to look through and say, how much does it cost for us to be housed? How much does it cost for us to eat? How much does it cost for everything that you do? Get some data on that. Figure out how much living costs for you. Then multiply that number per month times 3, times 4, times 5, or times 6 to build up your emergency fund. The choice on how many months of emergency fund you want to have, between 3 and 6 normally, is going to depend on a few factors. If your job is especially volatile and there's a higher chance that you might lose it, maybe think going closer to 6 months. If there's a pretty good chance that you'll be able to keep your job or that you'll be able to replace it soon after losing it, then maybe 3 months is sufficient. That'll just depend on your situation. But as a general recommendation, somewhere between 3 and 6 months is best. So from that 75% that you have for your consumption, start peeling off a little bit of that as well each month to fund your emergency fund so that within a reasonable amount of time you have a fully funded emergency fund ready for your use. Now, your emergency fund can go into something that is called a high-yield savings account. These high-yield savings accounts are like regular savings accounts in that you'll earn a little bit of money based on how much is in there each month, but obviously, because it's called a high yield, it's going to be much higher. The going rate as of March 28th, 2024 is around 5%. This is a great rate, and I don't expect it to stay around forever, but for now it's definitely worth the time that it takes to go to any of these places. Just Google open high yield savings account. I'm sure you'll be able to find one around 5% where you can park this money. It's just there for emergencies, not going to pull it out for anything else, but at least it's making a little bit, 5% per year. Now let's talk about that 25% that was cut off for savings. Let's say that you're in a situation where you decide that 10% of your gross income is going to be going to repaying your debt, and that other 15% is going into retirement investing. Now, how should that be done? To the extent that it can be, investing should always be done in tax-advantaged accounts. These are either a RISA plan offered through your work, such as a 401k, a 403b, 457b, or through an IRA that you open for yourself or for your spouse. In either case, you have the choice between a traditional or a Roth. I made another video explaining the differences between these specifically for the 457b account, and I would recommend you go check that out. So we have these two options, our work-provided plan or our individual plan. They're essentially the same for tax purposes, but there is going to be a difference in the contribution limits that we have. A work-provided plan will allow us to put away $23,000 per year into that tax-advantaged account. An IRA is going to allow us to put away $7,000 per year per person. So if you open one for yourself and for your spouse, that would be $14,000 a year. A work-offered plan and the IRA are the most obvious choices for tax-advantaged accounts, but there are other options such as HSAs, 529 plans, things like that, that will allow you to get up to that 15% savings rate, all within a tax-advantaged account. Once the money is within the 401k, or the IRA, or whatever tax-advantaged account that I choose, it's going to need to be invested so that it can start earning money. 401ks or any work-provided plan will usually do this automatically for you, or perhaps they'll give you an option, a list of investments to choose from. But in an IRA, you have to do it all yourself, or you hire a financial advisor such as myself to help you through it. In any case, make sure you choose a broadly diversified basket of funds, ETF-style investment so that you're getting the returns of the entire market. One way or the other, the best advice I can give for the investment side is to make it an automatic process. Make it automatically come out of your paycheck, or make it withdraw from your bank account on the first of every month. Whatever you need to do such that this 15% is always taken out, or whatever your percent ends up being for these investments and counts. Try to make the good habits easy and the bad habits hard. Additionally, many work 401k plans or 403bs or whatever it is are going to offer a match. So it's important to look into, if you are going to be getting a match from them, to at least contribute enough to that portion of the plan to get the full match. As well, if you have any previous 401ks from other jobs that you worked or perhaps from your residency, you can roll those over into your IRA for sake of consolidation. Okay, next up, let's talk about life insurance. This is a very important thing for those who have dependents, whether that is a spouse who is unable to work or a child that you have. Getting life insurance can be very important for the unfortunate case of if you do pass away. There is only one good answer for life insurance, and that is term life insurance. There are many salesmen out there that are going to try to sell you on whole or universal life insurance, where you use it as both an investment and as a life insurance plan. I have never seen a good use for these, except for the uber wealthy, in which case your accountant should bring it up to you, not a salesman. Instead, look for term insurance, where it is literally just a contract. I pass away, my beneficiaries receive X amount of money. I pay you that for the contract. If you're young, in your 30s or even in your 40s, you can get these for incredibly cheap. You can get a $500,000 policy for hundreds of dollars. So take a good look at your life. See what it would be like if you actually passed away and who would be depending on you, and take out a life insurance policy in accordance with that risk. A lot of jobs will give you a life insurance policy, which is nice. I still recommend getting a little bit of personal coverage on top of that because, in a car crash, that would be fine to have a work policy, but say you got sick and then you lost your job and then you died 6 months later. You wouldn't have your policy through work anymore. So I think it's still good to get a personally owned life insurance policy. Okay, up next, and this is a big one, housing, especially renting versus getting a mortgage. You're definitely going to need a place to live. It's just a fact of life. So let's talk through the advantages of both options. I think just right out of the gate, I would say rent. Rent while you are young, while you are still figuring life out. A lot of the industry, especially the mortgage industry, is trying to sell you on this fact that if you are not in a mortgage, if you're not owning your house and getting into this equity, that you're just losing. You're just throwing your money away into a blender. And my best advice for you is if you are feeling that way, stop feeling that. I think I would make a good therapist. The truth is, your first mortgage payment is something like 95% is going to interest repayment, while only an abysmal 5% or so is actually going into the equity of your house. And that's not even including private mortgage insurance, which is totally just money being thrown away into the blender. Truthfully, there is nothing shameful about renting at all. In fact, there are many advantages to it. First off, you have freedom. When you're young, you don't really know what life is going to look like, where you're actually going to want to settle down, in most cases. Give yourself the freedom to make that change. As well, you don't have to be your own property manager. If your washing machine breaks or whatever it ends up being, you have somebody to call and say, hey, I need you to come fix this for me. If you're the owner of the house, you're the one that you need to call, and you have to go fix all of your own stuff. And that just might be a little bit too stressful for someone starting their own job. Of course, there are many advantages to having a mortgage as well, the biggest one being the paying into equity in your own house and eventually being able to own that property. If you are so 100% certain that you know where you're going to live, perhaps it's not a bad idea. I would still wait until you have a decently sized down payment, as this will get you a much better mortgage rate. In general, it's good to have about 20% as a down payment, because above 20%, you don't have to pay this PMI, this private mortgage insurance, on a conventional mortgage. So, we've talked about a lot of good things: budgeting, making sure everything is within the proper limits and that you're putting away money for retirement and for paying off your loans. We've talked about life insurance and when that's important to get, when it's important to buy a house versus rent, and what you can be doing about your investments. The most complicated topic here is the investments. There's so much nuance there. There's so many different accounts that you can get into and choices that you can make. Make sure that you reach out to a registered fiduciary financial advisor and get a second opinion. As always, we're happy to sit down, talk through your situation, get everything figured out with you on the investment end and any other questions that you may have. Feel free to email me at adam@harvardav.com and set up a time to talk. Other than that, feel free to post any questions you have in the comments, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Investing for Physicians.